All right, on to the next speaker. At this time, we will be introducing Lieutenant Colonel Peter Garrettson. We switched his time slot with Mr. Rick Tomlinson, who's going to speak next. Lieutenant Colonel Garrettson is a former member of the NSS Board of Directors who came into contact with the space advocacy community while serving as the Chief of Future Technology Branch for the headquarters of the Air Force. He will be speaking on why space is important in national security, now and in the future. Lieutenant Colonel Garrettson.
So I want to begin with a few points that I want to make. And the first is that, what's our relationship? I work for you. I take an oath to the Constitution, not to the service, not to the President, but to the Constitution. And I, as a member of your military service, do what you as the American people choose to make your command. And what you choose to do in terms of our organization of space, I think will have vast consequences in the future. And I want to make sure that you are the best educated possible as an electorate. And so within that, I am a space educator and an educator of space strategists, as you working with Dr. Zarnik at the Air Command and Staff College. And I've had the benefit of having to think about space for a long time. And in fact, I'm the benefactor of Ambassador Cooper, who came with another gentleman, Klaus Heiss, to be one of the speakers at a strategy session that I had running at the Pentagon well over a decade, almost a decade and a half ago. So I've had a long time to think about space and what is the ultimate expression of space power and why you should care. And I'm going to try to let you walk away. It's going to be a bit of a whirlwind tour, but you're going to walk away in a very empowered position. You're going to walk away understanding a lot of things that probably most of your fellow citizens don't understand, the state of play in a lot of things. And I'm going to remove the complexity from you. Instead of giving you some paralyzing difficult, I think the answers are actually exceptionally simple. And you're in a position as a voter to move out on those things. So with that, I want to start with some slides. So I want to go over these things, right? How is space integral to our economy and national security right now? How is that evolving in the future? What are some of the vulnerabilities from the environment and other actors? And then how are we anticipating this to move into this multi-trillion-dollar economy? And what does that mean for a US-led order? Why do we, and why do you care about a US-led world order? Because we benefit tremendously by the ability to set the rules to our benefit, and not in a selfish way, but because liberty is a wonderful way to conduct business. And we extend that, right, because we believe in the power of collaboration over the power of coercion. And if we want to have that kind of an order in the future, it's necessary that we lead. So one of the other things I did want to start off with was what I think is among an amazing quote. Have any of you guys read the book, The Little Prince, about the person who lives on an asteroid? Anybody? Yes. So the author said this, and I think it is among the most beautiful quotes, and hopefully I will be able to bring this home. He says, if you wish to build a ship, do not divide men into teams and send them out in the forest to cut wood. Instead, teach them to long for the vast and endless sea. And I hope to teach you to long for the vast and endless expanse that is space. So, are we able to dim the lights a little bit? Because I think a lot of my slides are going to be a bit dark. And it's not important that you see me. This is space from about 300, 400 kilometers up. You can see that tiny sliver. That's the atmosphere, right? And I'm sure you hear from many people about, spaceship Earth and the fragility. And I think it is amazing to be able to see the scale of human civilization and how we're transforming things. But this is the realm of low Earth orbit. So, my slides got squeezed a little bit. So it's important to sort of understand a little bit about space to begin with. And what I would say you want to understand is that it's really not like air. Like, it's nothing. I'm a pilot. That's not how space works. But all of you have thrown a baseball. right? So if you look up here, there's a cannon, it shoots the cannonball, and if it's not going very fast, it like falls down. You shoot that cannonball a little bit further, it falls a little bit further away. But an amazing thing is if you shoot that cannonball above the atmosphere and you shoot it hard enough, it actually goes all the way back around to where it started. And it keeps doing that forever. And that's how orbits work. So, if you think about like where space is, it starts about 100 kilometers straight up and keeps going forever, and up stops meaning anything. And this is one of the reasons why thinking about space is so distinct from somebody like me in a blue uniform that thinks about air. So if you look here, what I've got is on the far right, if it's not too small for you, you can see how close to the Earth the International Space Station and the Hubble telescope actually are. And that little red arc that I've got up there, that's how high an ICBM travels on its way from, say, Russia to the United States. So this is what I want you to understand about what are the important orbits that people care about today. The Earth is rolling around. And the first one that's important are the sun-synchronous or polar orbits. They're coming over the top, and inside the Earth is rotating underneath it. So it's like a raster scan. One satellite can eventually see every point on the entire planet. So if I'm going to put up a spy satellite, I want to put it there. If I want to put up an Earth-sensing satellite, that's a great place to minimize the resources. So that's a very important orbit. And then way out at the far end is geostationary orbit. Just so happens that the speed to run that racetrack is the exact same speed that the Earth turns around. So if I put a satellite there, it looks like it's staying straight over the equator forever. And that's great because I only need like 3 satellites to get communication over the whole Earth. So that's terrific from a resource perspective and is very important for communication. And in between, there are some clever other orbits, one of which is halfway in between. And that allows us to, that's where we put our position, navigation, and timing so that we can time our signals and figure out on our phone where we are. Now, space is so unbelievably integral to our economy. It is a critical national infrastructure today. It is absolutely critical to your lives today. The first part here is from satellite communications. All kinds of business-to-business communications is happening. And satellite communications is about to explode in an unbelievable way. So till now, the majority of satellite communications, and particularly in value, has been out in the geostationary belt. But now we have people wanting to grow the number of small satellites in low Earth orbit by extreme numbers. And I'll talk a little bit more, but that will mean global ubiquitous broadband internet everywhere on planet Earth. I also point out that compared to aviation, it's already a larger market. So then we have all kinds of Earth observation, reconnaissance, that we're able to look and see everything from weather, knowing that a hurricane is coming, knowing that weather is coming, being able to prepare for a snowstorm, now being able to count parking cars in a parking lot or know where things are. And a tremendous opportunity, whether it's radar, whether it's looking at radio signals. It's absolutely amazing how we are running efficiently our economy. And then, of course, we've got satellite navigation, GPS. All of you have phones. You've got Waze that can take you around. Imagine what it would be like to have to go back suddenly to maps if that was not available. But way more than that is the timing that knits together our electrical grid, timing signal and navigation signals that are critical to the efficiency of our economy. And whether or not you are concerned about it or not, as an efficiency, there is no greener technology than the GPS system. It makes all of our transportation in every domain about 15% more efficient. So consider the impact of that on fuel and emissions. All right, this is kind of an overview of who's got what satellites and of what kind. You can get a sense of this, that the majority of satellites today, or the largest number, is communications, and then Earth observation behind that. And you can say that we, the United States, are blue, so at the moment we have the preponderance. So till now, we've really thought about this as, we're people in glass houses, we don't want to throw stones. But it's amazing how fast others are coming into this realm and how important it is for us to structure it. So I want to talk a little bit about what's the reality. Even when I talk to most military officers, they have no idea if there are like 3 satellites or a gazillion up there. So there are about 2,000 total satellites, and the United States pretty much has almost half of them. So you can see up there, just shy of 2,000, probably as of today, there are 2,000. And then most of them are close in low Earth orbit. And then the next highest number is out there in GEO with a few smattering. And if you look at the United States, of our 849, you've got most of them are commercial. And then you have lesser amounts of military and government. All right. But there are threats. And I don't want you to be paralyzed by these threats, because there are threats in every domain, on land, on sea. Nobody's worried about the fact that we have navies. We're still able to conduct vast commerce, despite the fact that we have a navy on the ocean that protects commerce. But we have a number of different threats that other actors are trying to hold our critical infrastructure at risk. Now, I think the chief concern about that risk is less the all-out war, which we have to be prepared for, but it's the coercive power of us not being able to respond directly in kind, or to be able to be in that position to counter coercion, and to counter coercion to protect commerce. All right, let's see. I thought I had this figured out, and now. Okay, so everything, you've got direct descent assets, which are just missiles that go up and attack and blow up the satellite. And then you've got lasers from the ground that try to shoot at the cameras or try to overload the solar cells. Then you've got jamming, where the uplink and downlink between the radios is something that you try to overwhelm so that the satellite can't communicate, which is also very easy for adversaries to do. And then, of course, you've got the exciting stuff, right? What are the other guys doing on orbit, where it's satellite versus satellite? And there are all kinds of interesting things that our competitors are trying to do to make the game difficult for us. So they've got things that run into our satellites. They've got things that come up close and jam. They've got programs to try to develop directed energy weapons, whether it is lasers or high-powered microwaves. You could imagine that they might spray chemicals on your lens, or that they'll put a robot arm out there. And we haven't previously designed our systems to be ready for these kind of threats. So that just requires that we get on it. It's actually not that difficult. We just have to make sure that we're focused on that. So I want to talk a little bit more about geography. That's important because you've heard other speakers talk about it. So unfortunately, it's still hard to see, but I've got 2 red lines right around the Earth, and I've got that same ICBM line coming over the poles. And that's just to give you a sense of scale. And then immediately outside of low Earth orbit, which sort of goes from about 100 kilometers to 2,000 kilometers, is the first of the Van Allen radiation belts, where the magnetic field of our planet traps these super fast particles that can really damage satellites. And so 2 things can happen that could have really serious consequences for our nation. One is this little guy up here on the top left, the sun. It sometimes discharges an immense amount of solar wind that can interact with that, and can interact with our ionosphere and cause us EMP-like problems on planet Earth. And so it would be good if we had a surveillance system and if we were prepared for something like that, because that certainly could be existential. It can also put things into these belts that can degrade satellites as well as cause threats to human beings, and we need to know about that. And of course, an opponent can put a nuclear weapon, as you heard Dr. Pry talk about, where they can go much lower than that ICBM arc there, and can introduce a forcing function that then creates a possibility to degrade all the satellites underneath that over a couple months, negating billions of dollars of investment. So that's something to consider. And then we don't like to put satellites inside either of those donuts if we can help it. We like to be outside of them. And then the last sort of existential class threat that we have to be aware of is that there are these things out there on the right, asteroids. Very real threat from very small ones that are like a few meters that look like they're a hypersonic vehicle or look like they're a nuclear weapon coming through, and we have no real advance warning right now. We should, but we don't have that. And then you've got larger ones that if they're a little larger than 15 meters, they can come down low enough to do what happened in Chelyabinsk this year and injured about 1,500 people from flying glass. And of course, if they get any bigger than that, they're going to kill a city. And if they get sort of around 100, 150 meters, you're talking something that's getting close to a continent killer. And then if you go beyond that, of course, we know where most of the really big civilization-ending ones are. But this is something that somebody should be in charge of, and nobody's in charge of them today. So going forward, what's animating? Well, we're lucky enough to have some billionaires that are leading a much larger social movement for general spacefaring. And if we want that as a society, and I think it's a vision worthy of us to want to be multiplanetary, to want to move industry off Earth, to want to ignite a third industrial revolution, that's going to mean lots of jobs and a tremendous economy and wealth and a much better world for our children, that's something we may want to do, to become spacefaring, to move heavy industry off Earth, as Mr. Bezos wants. And you can see we're starting to move, right? This ideological commitment, not government driving. SpaceX decided on their own they wanted to have reusability. It shifts the map. I showed you the earlier map around Earth, but now that's there, the moon becomes important. The moon is now, the poles of the moon, is the most important strategic real estate in the universe to the future of American power and the system that we want. It is the leverage point. It is like Pearl Harbor, the Rock of Gibraltar, all wrapped up in one. It is the place where we have vast amounts of water that we can turn into rocket fuel, that we can turn into living, that you can extend a logistic structure to do vastly ambitious things, right next to the peaks of eternal light, where you have nearly constant sunlight for power. And that's the bridge point to a much, much larger potential economy. Trillions of dollars in terms of potential metal and structural materials from which we can do things like that, where we're building vast industrial structures on orbit in space and moving out so we can do truly ambitious things, like build a ring of solar power satellites that could provide 24-hour green energy to planet Earth. At scale. 5 times the scale of what human beings would need if 10 billion people had this lifestyle with air conditioning and lighting and everything. And that's a dream I think is worthy of America. You've got things that are larger than all economies put together in terms of the amount of mineable resources out there. And you've got so many of these asteroids. This is actually not even accurate. We know of 20,000 close to Earth that could support many times the population that we have on Earth in space and free-flying habitats. And all those ones in red, as much as they're resources for our business, are also potential threats to our civilization. So we want to go out there. And if you look at it, I mean, that asteroid belt, which is the big green one, has the ultimate possibility of sustaining 150 billion people. So our story as humanity is just beginning. And we're at that point right now to decide that we want to be spacefaring. We can build things that look like that, out of things that look like that inside might look like that. We can take and green our solar system. We can garden the galaxy, taking our entire ecosystem with us. But we're not alone, right? This vision is shared by others. The idea that the moon could be important for humanity, for its resources, for the sustainability of human civilization, for energy, is shared as a matter of policy by our competitors over in China. And they have a vision to industrialize the moon, to build solar power satellites. Because unlike us, when Ambassador Cooper and General Graham wrote High Frontier, we didn't act upon it. They've decided to act upon it and make it national policy. And their plan is to put up the first prototype by 2030. 24 megawatts of collection, beaming 1 megawatt down to planet Earth, completely dwarfing the International Space Station and doing it in geostationary orbit. So that's the scale of the peacetime military offensive that we have to be able to look at. And what I would tell you is that while you have to worry about the warfighting aspect, it's kind of like focusing on the hypnotic brass knuckles while the person reaches around to grab what's really valuable. And if you don't want to lose, the plan here is to win without fighting. And if you don't want to lose, you've got to play against that peacetime military offensive. And you're going to have organizations that are focused on seeking primacy on this stage. The last thing I would just say is, it's okay to be skeptical because we're naturally linear thinkers. But if you look at how things progress, it's a series of S-curves. There's a bit of hype, underperforms, then it's additive, cumulative. We learn upon what we learn and continue to move up an exponential curve. We go up as a logistics curve, one against another, it keeps building. So to imagine that the future is going to look like a continuation of today, I don't think so. And I hope that I have caused you to long for that vast expanse in the sky and the amazing opportunity that it can provide to yourselves, your children, and our responsibility to our posterity that is enshrined in our Constitution.
All right, so our next speaker is Rick Tomlinson. Rick Tomlinson is known as a godfather of the space revolution, as Tomlinson has spent more than 30 years defining, enabling, and founding many of the pillars of the frontier movement. He has been called one of the world's top space visionaries and is credited with helping create the commercial space industry, often referred to as New Space. A leader, writer, speaker, and congressional witness, he helped start the first mission to find water on the moon, led the private takeover of the Russian Mir space station, signed the first space tourist, and was a founding board member of the X Prize. In 2015, he won the World Technology Award. Tomlinson also co-founded the Space Frontier Foundation, the first space organization to take on the aerospace industry complex in Washington, D.C. Let's give a warm welcoming to Rick Tomlinson.
Thank you. Yeah, we're dimming the lights good. So we're going to go for a pretty quick ride. I'm going to show you a lot of different stuff. Hopefully you'll remember some of it. Some of it you may just get a good feeling about, but maybe you'll get a couple of good facts that will come out of this. We're going to talk a little bit about what we call the space revolution. So I actually have worked with two nonprofits, the Earthlight Foundation and New Worlds. I'm going to give a blatant plug for our conference in Austin, November 15th and 16th. Dr. Ferrucci, Dr. Moser, and I think Mr. Gerritsen are going to be there. We would love you to come down to Austin and join us. We have a great party called the Space Cowboy Ball, which asks the question, what would you wear to a party on Mars in 100 years? We give out awards. That's the Deputy Prime Minister of Luxembourg, who co-founded a $200 million fund. And then we have some guests. Why am I doing that? I was the one telling you about that. There we are, Space Cowboy Ball. And then we have guests that show up. This guy has a bookstore. He gave him the Space Cowboy Award. We gave Dr. Pete Wharton the first Space Cowboy Award, for those of you who are fans of Pete. So, this is lichen. Lichen is a symbiotic creature. Basically, it's algae and fungi working together to create life. So, all lichen does is live. It lives in places it's not supposed to live. It just lives, and then it makes more lichen. So on a day when lichen makes more lichen, that's like a freaking home run for lichen. Like, we're done, okay, we made some more lichen. This is my daughter a couple of years ago. That's her touching a flower for the very first time in her life. In that moment, in that very moment, she transformed who she was as a sentient being. The moment before she touched that flower, she was one sentient being. The moment after, she was another. That's what human beings do. That's what sentient beings do. We explore, we grow, we touch the world, we touch the universe. So the future, I'm going to make friends with this one. The future is not going to remember this. The future is really not going to care about this. Or just to be fair, or Elon's tweets, okay? So they're not going to care. This is what they're going to care about. They're going to care about what we do to build the future. What do we do to transform what tomorrow might be? So we've already been through the beginning of the space race. This is the 50th anniversary, as you know, or as many of you know, of landing on the moon. This year, 50 years since it happened. We went to the moon. We put footsteps on the moon, or as I branded with some friends of mine a few years ago, flags and footprints. Why? Because we didn't know what to do afterwards. We had no plan afterwards. We didn't know really why we were going. And that's going to be sort of the essence of what I'm going to be talking about today. The question why. Because if we go back to the moon, or let's say we go to Mars, and we don't understand why we are really going, a few years after that, there'll be a Fox Television 3D special about how we never really went to Mars. You can bet. So there was a spin-off of the Apollo program, an amazing spin-off. And it looked like this. This is what they call MidCentury. I love the fact that the furniture I grew up with now has a name like Victorian, right? So MidCentury. Back when we had, I love showing this to college students and going, okay, that was when your remote control was your little brother or your sister. Right? So here's what we're doing. Watching television. We're sitting there on the floor watching TV in our living room. And these are the images we're seeing. Vietnam, Voyager, Galileo, going out into the solar system and beyond. The Cold War. We actually had drills. We had to go hide under tables. I don't know why that's going to work. Maybe for EMP it'd be good if it was a metal table with a mesh. I don't know. The Cold War. It's everywhere. We're seeing this. There's terrifying images. And then there's Star Trek and Captain Kirk going out. And then you flip the channel again. And there's people driving around on the moon. And you flip the channel again and there's this guy. And I don't know if that's going to be anybody's role model. I'm sure it's somebody. But I would prefer these guys as my role model because they're on TV too. And I'm that little kid. And a bunch of us are those little kids. And then there are these guys. I'm sorry. And off we go into the Falcon. So what happened, though, was this interesting period, the 70s. We'd just been to the moon. We had Voyager. We had Galileo. We could do anything. And ahead of us was something great. We didn't know what it was going to be. But the world was teetering on the edge of this thing called the Cold War. And a guy named Gerard K. O'Neill wrote a book called The High Frontier. And it was incredible because what he said was, you've got the right stuff. You don't have to be a gentleman in a suit like this. You don't have to be an academic. You have the right stuff. He insisted on this cover, on this imagery. Regular people living in space. Take your tools, the resources of space, free enterprise and democracy, and go make a new civilization. Because see, back then, we believed there was this thing called the space shuttle coming. And it was going to fly 50 times a year, and it was going to be about $100 a pound to go into space. That's what we believed in the 70s. That's what we were sold. Of course, as many of you know, it flew maybe around 5 times. And it was around $10,000 to go into space. That upset a couple of us. So we were trapped. We had this dream, we had this stuff that we'd been inspired by. We were told we could go, but the cage of our imagination, the cage of our culture was closed. We were locked into this world. But there was a revolution starting because those kids that were watching that television started to grow up. I call them Apollo's children. There's actually a documentary out called The Orphans of Apollo. We started to grow up. This is Deke Slayton and David Hanna. They launched this rocket, first commercial rocket ever launched into space, Matagorda Island, off of where I come from in Texas. It failed, but they tried. I created an organization with some friends called the Space Frontier Foundation. A buddy of mine who was a protege of a guy named Newt Gingrich, myself, and another gentleman. We created this organization. There was the International Space University was started, SED, Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. All of us were what we called Jerry's kids. We used to go to Dr. O'Neill's conferences and sit around. There was literally a moment where we toasted our lives and fortunes to breaking humanity out of the planet in our lifetimes. That literally happened. My friend Peter Diamandis called it the benign conspiracy. I said, that sounds like a tumor. Why don't we call it the benevolent conspiracy? And so we went with benevolent instead. But we all fanned out. There were a bunch of us. The High Frontier organization spun out of it. I was lucky enough to be part of a team. I found a rich guy. Always find a rich guy. I found a rich guy. We went out and we actually leased the Mir space station to try and keep it up for a while. We got our asses kicked because it was kind of threatening to the big palace they were building to have this little dirt floor or Motel 6 down the road. But we went out and we tried. We flew the world's first commercial crew. We leased it for a couple of months. They were out there to survey for what we were going to do with it later. And at one point, we were trying to figure out how to pay the rent. One of us said, well, what about a rich guy? Would he buy a ticket? So I was very, very lucky to be able to sign up a guy named Dennis Tito. And when we lost the Mir, we had a contract. He had $1 million in escrow. We were able to put him on the International Space Station. He became the first civilian person to buy a ticket to the International Space Station. But the revolution kept going. And frankly, we were able to slowly begin to win at least the first games. And this time is over. It's over. It's not completely over. We're talking about historic time levels here. In fact, this magazine came out and congratulated us. I don't know why they went with the yellow hand. I'm sorry. They congratulated us. And I remember, because our people were celebrating, like, we won the revolution. I said, dude, no, it's not over yet. There's more to come. A lot more to come. In fact, some people did freak out when the shuttle stopped flying. I used to put out press releases that said, scuttle the shuttle. Believe me, Dan Gold and these other people had me on dartboards. The head of Boeing still has me on some sort of, I don't know, juju curse list or something. But it was the beginning. We had to remove this entity. We had to start cracking what Eisenhower called the aerospace industrial complex to allow the children of enterprise to be able to step up and start doing things. And then this happened. I think of this as space porn, by the way. Right there. Reusability. The ability to fly into space and reuse the vehicles. Remember that picture I showed you of the shuttle where both pieces came back? This is where we were going. They knew it at the beginning. The great designers and engineers of the aerospace companies at the time knew that's where we needed to get to, and finally we started to get there. So I like to say, Rick's handy-dandy guide to space or whatever, that there are 3 keys to the frontier. We need regular, reliable, reusable access to space. We need the use of space resources, no matter where they are, for any purpose that you want to use them for. And you need governments that either support you or stay basically the hell out of the way. That's it. You have those 3 things, and you can begin to turn the place you're going to into a frontier. So, we're working on the access part. We've got Bezos. He actually had a book club. The High Frontier was his first. He had 12 books he would sell. That was one of the first books. He gave his valedictorian speech. He said, I'm going to go make money. I'm going to build colonies in space. This is not an accident. You're not seeing just rich boys and their toys doing something. This is something that's been worked on for about 35 years. By a lot of people who, by the way, are not billionaires. We're just regular folks who would sit around in their kitchens at night making calls, counting votes on the floor to protect the funding so that this stuff could happen. I showed Elon, I gotta show Jeff. This is West Texas. Reusability. Blue orange. And I'm gonna cut that so I don't have to go into my time too much. Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft, built this vehicle. Total nerd, total geek. I show this presentation a lot to school kids. I'm like, you're a nerd, you're a geek, stay there. Keep doing it, stay in school. This baby's gonna fly. And then there's this guy, just a shy guy. Sierra Nevada, not a necessarily billionaire company. There's a lot of them that aren't. The other thing I mentioned was use the resources where you are. Back in the day, this was the desert of the North American continent. This was a spaceship of its time. It was the engines of the spaceship of its time, and that's the propellant. Use the resources where you find them. Bigelow Aerospace. Bob Bigelow has 2 of these in space. He's been testing them since 2008. Places to live. He's working on his larger modules. There are 3 or 4 space stations that are under development. In 2015, after fighting the Senate launch system, that was the name I gave what was called the Space Launch System at the time, another reason Boeing hates me, the Senate launch system, I was able to call up a guy named Bill Gerstenmayer's human spaceflight. We had a very awkward first couple of minutes, and then we agreed to start talking about what we believe in and what we share. What we share is the idea of humanity moving out into space. We have different approaches, but we could work together. So we pulled together 100 people, and for 2 days locked them in a room. And we had, Scott Pace was there, Jeff Bingham, we had Buzz Aldrin, we had Lori Garber, who would have been Hillary's probably administrator. We had left, right, we had small companies, big companies, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. We got them to agree that the word settlement should be at the top level of our space program. Now, it's taken a while, but we got what was called originally the Asteroid Act to pass. What was really interesting, both the House and the Senate passed it. I mean, do you think we're doing science fiction? They actually did this. That rule is there. Other laws have started to occur. I worked with the government of Luxembourg on space resources. UAE is coming in. They've declared they're going to put a city on Mars, and they're funding it, which means they are the first country on Earth to put funding behind the settlement of space. Not the United States, the UAE. And all these other countries are coming on board. Now, this is current right now. Senator Corden and Senator Peters, I think from Michigan, have co-sponsored this bill, and the word settlement is in the actual bill. Why is that important? Because that drives you. That's the why. Then you can compare what you're doing to where it is you're going and why you're doing it. The new space race is happening. Many of you have seen the Better Sheet last week. They crashed, I think 150 meters above the lunar surface. I think their motor went out, burned through, I don't know what it was. But they were the first commercial spacecraft to leave Earth orbit, to orbit the moon, and to attempt a lunar landing. There are more behind them. They're coming. Let me see, did I go? I skipped. Oh, well, anyway. All right, well, look. There is a bit of a bottleneck. And the bottleneck right now has been largely our own government and the way governments think about things. So, an iPhone, for example, is an app development platform. In other words, it's something that you give to people to allow them access to the universe of human interactions. And then all these creative minds start working on that app development platform, and pretty soon what started out as a telephone becomes your access to the global brain. I mean, think about it. The thing in your pocket started out as a telephone, not something your grandmother could send you pictures of kittens on. This is our application development platform for the entire universe for the human race. Bill Gerstenmayer tells me it takes roughly 2.75 people just to keep the lights on the International Space Station. There are normally between 3 and 6 people on the station. That means for a portion of the year, 0.25 of one human being represents all the human creativity possible for intellectual property development, product development, experimentation, just staring into space and thinking of what could be something useful to do. And they happen to be a government employee. No offense to government employees. So what happens when we begin to create access to that platform at massive levels? Elon rolled it out. He called it the big effing rocket. I'm a Battlestar Galactica guy, so I'm gonna use fracking, a big fracking rocket. But he wants to go to Mars. He wants to put 100 people on Mars. Let's say he can't do that. Let's say he doesn't make it to Mars. Let's say he can only put 50 people at a time every few months into orbit, low Earth orbit. That's times X the number of people that have access to that platform right now. A revolution is happening. What will happen, these are some of the kids, by the way, who come to our conference. We have a few hundred of them that show up in the next room and design space colonies. This is actually some of them. But what happens when we let their minds get out there? That kid sitting in your living room right now who's playing Nintendo or MOG games with somebody around the world on the other side of the planet. What happens when they get the chance? What happens with these, what I call Mayflower class? The Mayflower is about 100 to 125 people. What happens when Mayflower class spaceships start flying into space? It's going to be amazing. The frontier is about to open. Very quickly, I want to mention Space Fund. That's my company. The reason I'm doing this is because I believe it is sort of the week before the internet. Space Fund is an entrepreneurial venture capital firm. I'm cashing in on my scars and my ability to pick up my phone and, forgive my language, call my friends and say bullshit, no bullshit when it comes to businesses that are trying to move into that ecosystem. And we are looking for investors. Anybody is welcome to join. But this is our vision. Open the frontier to everybody. Let anybody who shares the risk share in the profits. The game is expanding. This is actually a few months old. Some of these companies have actually already died. It's one reason we have a venture capital fund that specializes in space, so that we can lower the risk for people. And we're actually using what are called security tokens. In other words, rather than having to hold your funds for 10 or 15 years, once you hold it for 1 year, you find somebody who's on the same whitelist as you are, that has been approved at the same level as you are, and maybe they have fractional ownership of a building in Manhattan. And you want to get out of it because your daughter needs a Tesla. So you want to sell, you meet in a coffee shop, click, 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 and you're able to transfer your security tokens. It's the blockchain. And I have been trying to learn that language. Oh my God. Enterprise works. Free enterprise. Our system works. It transforms the world. Now, there is a role for government. Lewis and Clark. These were not settlers, though. Settlers who actually are people who live in space, who live on the frontier. That's their home. Home is the place you live when you're done going to work. That's where you have your kids. This is a very ironic shot. But it's a good shot. This is one period where NASA actually thought they were going to get into some actual business enterprises. These are settlers who, by the way, I think that's an EMP proof habitat right there. I love the fact that the manufactured goods they're so proud of, they brought out to be in the picture. I got this from Sears Roebuck. Look at that chair. This is the partnership we can use. This is where we could work with the military. This was the benevolent side of the military in a sense, in that the Captain Kirk side of things, Alpha Town. 100 years after the fort, you have a settlement. I'm just going to roll through here. Can I get a couple extra minutes? Okay, I'll go fast. All right. So here's one thing I want to point out. This guy's already sold. There may be another party in charge. This is your audience over here. This guy's already got it. The conservative side already has it. Whoever wins next needs to get it. We have to avoid these yo-yos we see all the time. There needs to be a way to have that conversation. We're not very good at doing that. We're not very good at taking a vision and trying to make it spread across political spectrums. We have to break out of the cage. Right now, we're beginning to flow into a new world, a new universe. Space offers us the moral equivalent of war. The challenge, the ability to transform who we are and what we do. To take technology development at an accelerated pace and spread it in different ways to different kinds of people and do it in such a way that it just absolutely revolutionizes our ability to live. These are different projects we can do. I'm going to skip through this. I'm going to show you this as I begin to wrap up. Every technology I'm going to show you here, we could do now. See, that cage isn't technological. That cage isn't even gravity that I showed you earlier. It's psychological. I love this because it's green. We were joking with some friends recently. I'm a tree hugger. I used to be the annoying kid who would put his foot in the door for Greenpeace and go, you don't care about the whales. But I'm a Texan, so I'm a tree hugger with an AR-15. But we can do any of this. Now, my friend, who's a doctor, will point out we will not be living on the surface of the moon or Mars at first. You'll be living under it. But we will be living there. Some people will be. And by the way, no matter who sends them there, the Russians, the Chinese, the Germans, the Yugoslavians, whoever it is, 2 or 3 generations in, they're going to say, screw you, you don't understand us. We are Martians. We're the people of the moon. How dare you try and tax us? We're independent. It's happened every time that humanity has spread out, going all the way back to the Greek islands in the Mediterranean. Just something to think about. There's a movie that used to be out there called Serenity and Firefly. I don't know if you ever saw that. Yeah. The language in the film and the TV series is a blend of English and Chinese. We can build these cities in space, communities, structures, as large as we want them. And imagine the things we can see. Imagine the future that we can offer our children. Imagine where we can take them. Imagine the hope, the possibility of being in a world that isn't focused on how many, silver Mercedes or Teslas you have. What political party you're in, because you can go anywhere and start to do anything. Imagine being in a world where the defining capability of the civilization is not how quickly and how well it can destroy itself, but how it can take those very tools, those very technologies, those very minds, those very systems that are designed to kill and turn them out to carry the seeds of life to worlds now dead. Imagine living in that society. Because I know that's where we can go. I know that our friends in the military, they're the very last people that want to hurt anybody. They believe in this dream. We have to believe in it. We can come together and do something really magnificent out there. And that's the big secret. Crystal clear. Let me show you one last picture here. We'll wrap it up. You're being very kind. It's a lot of beer on it. Go out on a starry night. Lay on the ground or sit in your car with the top down. If you got a convertible, that would be really cool. And look up into the stars. And let yourself fall upward into that universe. Do you know if it wasn't for the way the universe is constructed, there are so many stars out there, the sky would actually be white. There are more stars, more solar systems out there, more galaxies than there are grains of sand, as Carl Sagan said. Grains of sand on all the beaches and deserts of the earth. Some people say we're done. Done? We haven't even begun the beginning of the beginning of the beginning, to badly paraphrase Churchill. It's all out there. We have the possibility. We just have to make it happen. And this is the moment. This is the time. Thank you.
Open the pod bay door now. What I'd like each of you to do is give us your reactions to the advent of AI and what dynamic it interjects in your thinking. And we appreciate all the comments here, but what kind of dynamic that injects in your area of expertise and in your mind. I'm just curious about that.
So that's actually something I think about a lot, and AI has a lot of similarities to space because it's on the verge of really exploding and changing our way of life. And, there's some obvious things as we start flying thousands of satellites in low Earth orbit. we probably need to think about AI to help you to fly those, just because you need that kind of assistance. But beyond that, the one thing that I worry about is lethal autonomous warfare. So what happens when the first entity decides to put together something that can seek out and destroy all on its own using AI? And there are systems like that today, but the U.S. has a pretty solid line and policy that we won't cross to do lethal autonomous warfare. But that's not to say that it won't happen with somebody else. And if it does, what is our response? Are we prepared to counter that? Do we have counter AI technologies involved? And a lot of folks think that the first place that lethal autonomous warfare might happen is in space, because right now we don't have a lot of people to worry about. You can have these robotic systems go take out things. So there are some ties to that, and we worry about that quite a bit.
I'm not sure whether you were setting me up to talk about Brilliant Pebbles or not, but let me take off on that, because back in the 80s, folks up at Livermore really delved into this in the first real applications area that I'm aware of, where they talked about systems. And the way the Brilliant Pebbles were to operate, every one of them had a little computer in it, maybe not as powerful as this one is today, but I used to pull the ones in Europe out at the time. And that computer and the sensors on board and the communication links among 1,000 or up to 5,000, I guess, that we looked at the time, communicated within the constellation itself. So each of the satellites knew not only what its onboard sensors saw, but also what all the other sensors in the constellation saw. And with the algorithms that the folks at Livermore had written, would determine who had the best shot at any particular missile that might be launched from any place on the surface of the Earth. And there were actually studies done on this, and then one of them would say, "I got it," in effect, to everybody else. And it turned out that if you looked at a God's eye view of this whole thing, so that you really picked the smartest way to do it, that you would save a small percentage of what you could get out of just that simple algorithm. And that was the basic constellation that we were pursuing in the concept went through the full exploration of the Defense Acquisition Board inside the Pentagon, and the constellation that we had 2 contractor teams working on. There was a down select from 5 that bid on it, and they were Martin Marietta, now part of Lockheed Martin, and TRW Hughes, which is now part of Grumman, because all that other stuff went on. And they were working to do this. The cost of that constellation, which would have had an effectiveness of better than 95% in killing all of 200 RVs that could be launched from submarines, so basically salvo launch from anywhere. And the cost of that system was $10 billion in 1988 dollars. That was the estimate scrubbed by all of the Pentagon experts, not just the SDI shop that did it. This was on George Monahan's watch, who was the director before I was. And that would equate to about $20 billion now. And you look at what we've spent on missile defense, and we can do nothing like that with what we have now. So artificial intelligence, if you want to use those terms, and I use them in the context I described to you, could have saved us enormous amounts of money had we been willing to go to space. We weren't. And we had political inhibitions written in treaties at the time that would have prevented us from going to space, but even George Bush, W. Bush, withdrew from the treaty, and yet we did absolutely nothing to take advantage of that technology. Now, as I understand it, we have political inhibitions about doing it today to take advantage of artificial intelligence. The Chinese don't have those limits. And by the way, our good friend Pete Warden used to train a bunch of his young bucks out in Colorado Springs, including groups at the academy coming on. working with a group in England called Surrey. I don't know whether people here know anything about the Surrey Corporation. And they imported all that technology. Meanwhile, my successors at the Missile Defense Agency purged their libraries of everything we learned, fired all the technologists that had worked on it inside the government, and then led to a situation where the industry dispersed those people. So we not only ignored what we could do then, we did nothing to perpetuate what we understood at the time in any sort of intellectual way. So we're playing catch up. I mean, Mike Griffin, who was my deputy for technology during this period before Pete Warden, says we're playing catch up in the game. And he's being honest about that because we haven't done a damn thing to take advantage of what we knew how to do 3 decades ago.
Is space, the reason the reason your input is so important here is because is space, or could space be this autonomous atmosphere that will allow an application of AI to the kind of system you're talking about to protect us from ballistic missile attacks?
Sure. Well, I'm saying we knew how to do that then. We ignored it and still are ignoring it. And when I read I haven't read watched the whole hearing earlier this week, it sounds like to me that people I would think would know better aren't going to do it now either. Even in the Trump administration, which is leading forward. They're basically talking about using space sensors to cue ground-based or air-based interceptors. What stupidity is this? I mean, I really don't get it. And maybe it's all politically driven and can be understood in a rational way when you look at it that way. But as a technical person, I don't get it. I mean, we're wasting the taxpayers' dollars and we're not protecting the American people either.
I don't have a whole lot to add other than I'm generally skeptical of AI because I saw Terminator as a kid. I met a real-life general that looks exactly like the general that created Skynet in Terminator 3, which is very, very jarring. And I believe in a huge human future in space, so I generally dislike it when people mention space and AI. Most of the time they say, well, that means we don't need a human up there. But beyond that, I sort of yield to the experts, which I don't have much expertise in.
So I typically take 3 months to summarize my opinion to my students. I teach a course in strong AI. So on the sort of on the narrow end, I think we are in a race, and it's a race that matters for AI. And AI has machine learning has a huge role to play in the next generation of space assets, both in terms of their ability to defend themselves with autonomous maneuver, as well as to make use of enormous amounts of data, to collaborate in its command and control, and to shorten timelines that certainly our competitors are going to make us short. Involved in all of that, there are deep policy considerations about wanting to maintain adequate human control and responsibility that matter. In the longer term, and what I think is the more significant, is towards a general artificial intelligence, and what will that be? And in that, there are clearly many failure modes that we need to be concerned about and cautious about, and I applaud the efforts of those that are looking at AI safety. I completely take these seriously, but I'm an optimist. I think that it is a natural step for us to create within our ecosystem other intelligences that will facilitate our outward movement. I think it's very important that when we're talking about artificial general intelligences, that we start from the same position that we have in this country in terms of looking at sentient beings as deserving liberty and rights, and not starting to think about these as slaves that we have to cage up. I think they will be our children. They will be reading our culture. They will be our partners in the future. Hopefully, at least if our chief competitor goes after them, there'll be some ancestor worship as well. So they may keep us around for that. But generally speaking, I am bullish on the possibility that our mind children will not necessarily be made of meat, and they will help us survive and move forward and help us deal with many of our problems that require collective action solutions, for which an AI might be well suited. We don't know how far away that is. It could be one breakthrough of one person hooking up one neural net modeling to another one, or it may be decades in the future and lots of computer power away. But I do think that this is not a sci-fi topic. This is a topic that requires serious national intelligence thinking today.
No, it's not a sci-fi topic, and it does require serious national intelligence thinking today because it's almost already upon us. I think artificial intelligence is one of those watershed moments in civilization that's as profound as like the invention of the Gutenberg press, the made possible the printing press, or the invention of the hydrogen bomb. I think the latent potential of artificial intelligence is potentially more dangerous and more destructive than the hydrogen bomb, but also potentially more promising than the possibility of fusion energy from a hydrogen bomb. And Einstein warned about how whether our wisdom would keep pace with the evolution of our technology. Would we blow ourselves up before we got wise enough to know how to benefit and exploit it? Kissinger made a similar warning in a great article written in The Atlantic, I believe it was in June of last year, and how he wasn't aware of it. He was warning about the danger of the military-industrial complex, getting hold of artificial intelligence and then just exploiting it to the maximum. And as he was writing that article, Russia was doing test trials of this new superweapon that Putin announced called the Poseidon, which is basically this unmanned robot submarine. It's armed with a 100 megaton warhead. That's the plan, 100 megaton warhead. That's 10,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. It's the most powerful nuclear weapon, ever tested or developed. That's artificially intelligent. That's how the thing will work. So you've got an artificial intelligent robot submarine that's supposed to roam around the oceans hunting our ballistic missile submarines, with a 100 megaton warhead. Because if you could detonate that thing underwater, the shock wave will be greater than 100 kilometers. So you don't even have to be close to destroy it. That's the bad side, and it's already almost upon us. Their plan is to deploy 32 of those things. I wrote an article saying we should sink those things and let the Russians know that having an artificially intelligent 100 megaton bomb patrolling off the east and west coast of the United States is unacceptable to us. I mean, this is something, so it's already upon us, okay? But on the other hand, the promise of it to create technologies and technological possibilities that were unimagined, possibly something like this would enable us to have the kind of breakthrough so that we could realize the new frontier in space. And wouldn't it be great if we could get the military-industrial complexes of the world to focus on exploiting and developing the new frontier instead of deploying Poseidon submarines with artificially intelligent 100 megaton bombs? I wish we had an equivalent accomplishment for artificial intelligence on the positive side at this point. Right now the balance is bad.
Yeah, great setup. I almost look at it, I'm going to use a different word, augmented intelligence. And we had a company, it was a space resources company that I left a few years ago called Deep Space Industries. And when you start looking at mining operations millions of miles away, with the time delays, all the other issues that are involved, having the idea or having the capability of semi-autonomous decision-making robots that are out there that can make some level of decisions during lag times as far as communications go is going to be critical. But as we found out in one of our discussions, or one of the discussions revealed with us very early on, I was pointing out to our guys and I said, because they wanted to send AI robots. We're just going to send a bunch of AI robots, we're going to mine those asteroids, we're going to make a lot of money. I said, have you ever watched one of those mining shows on History Channel? You know what they do for 2/3 of those shows? They wait for the part that's coming because a piece of gravel of unexpected size jammed the damn thing up. Now that is not necessarily an AI solvable problem. It can be, but it's like, the old joke about stock car racing. If you want to throw off stock car, if you're being chased by a bunch of stock car fans, take a right. It's just a matter of, we have to be human, more human, ever more human. But I do believe, and that was perfect, very, very well said, They're using it for the ability of expanding our economic capabilities and doing things, leveraging. So that somebody can sit in a coffee shop, with a VR, interacting with their AI robot that they own, perhaps, mining an asteroid. Individual entrepreneur, okay? We actually did a storyboard. We were going to put this out. So an individual entrepreneur, they're talking to, I forgot, it was Joe. And Joe is out there, it's like, and this guy's sitting there having a cup of coffee, and it looks like he's talking to himself. It's like, okay, Joe, take that one, let's not have that one, go with that one, and da-da-da. And what he's doing is he's sorting gravel off of an asteroid, and he's putting it into his own little personal thing, and it's a la the trading post companies, the Canadian frontier and such. And so then they're taking their autonomous AI vehicles, are taking them in and unloading, and the guy's getting credits put to his account while he's sitting in a coffee shop on the earth. Individual entrepreneurs leveraged by AI robotics to be able to accomplish what would have taken major corporations to do in the past.
Let me add one thing. Before we leave this, I mentioned Mike Griffin. Do you all know who Mike Griffin is? No. Okay. Mike is the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering in the Defense Department today. He was my deputy during this period and he was George Monahan's deputy during the reviews of contractors and all. He well understands this technology. And when I look at his budget under the Space Defense Agency, which is now being challenged by the Secretary of the Air Force, no less, that we can't do this, and it's dedicated to trying to exploit private sector's advances and all the rest. And the Air Force is attempting to block it. I hope people are wise enough not to do it. But when I look at the budget that's requested next year, I think it's $170 million for everything he might do. The budget that I was able to get my last year there, over the opposition of Les Aspin, who chaired the Armed Services Committee at the time, and Sam Nunn, who chaired the Senate component, was $300 million that year, which translates to about $500 million today. So we're playing Petey Ante in catch-up game on technologies that we knew and understood how to do 30 years ago. That's where we are, and I hope we're going to figure out how to do better.
We have time for one more question.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
My question is that if there's going to be a race for stronger weapons or defense systems in the space, what are the implications of that for the global diplomacy in the long term, considering that there's a non-weaponization agreement, and how is the United States going to show itself globally?
So I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic in the long term. We had a long period of time. So we had a long period of time where we were lucky enough to be in a dominant. We didn't actually start space as a weapons-free zone. We started it as a weapons of mass destruction-free zone. And from the very beginning, we had anti-satellite weapons. We even had nuclear anti-satellite weapons. And during the Cold War, and when the Soviet Union collapsed, we were lucky enough to be able to take advantage, or you could also say that we were foolish enough not to press our advantage. In any case, there was a period of time when space was largely weapons-free, and we could just enjoy its benefits. Well, the problem became that for the United States in particular, the advantage that space afforded us in protecting our allies became such a center of gravity that it was just too juicy a target set for our enemies to ignore, or our potential coercers to ignore. And so they set about building systems to negate our advantage. So, now you get into a very destabilizing regime where the United States and its partners have a lot to lose by being coerced or threatened, and don't really have the systems to counter-threaten. Well, some of these systems are clearly things that humanity would rather do without. Debris causing ASATs are probably something that you don't want to use unless you're trying to defend against a nuclear weapon coming at you. And nobody's talking about putting weapons of mass destruction in space. I don't think there's any reason to worry about somebody putting nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction. So what's happening right now is really a very limited satellite versus satellite kind of dance. And in many ways, this should be much less concerning than warfare anywhere else, because in space, you're not directly causing casualties, but you are threatening critical national infrastructure, and you want to be in a position where you can credibly have a limited engagement so that you deter on that escalation ladder. I suspect that what will happen, and what you saw happen in the Cold War, is that there will be a buildup of some kind of weaponization and anti-satellites, and then that will clearly become clear that, okay, enough of that, I don't like what you're doing, you don't like what I'm doing, this is in our mutual interest to back off. And so just like in the Cold War, if you have hard-nosed individuals who are not making arms control agreement because of ideological reasons, but because of interest-based reasons, you can easily negotiate to a position where there is superior global stability. But even if that doesn't happen, it's just nobody is worrying that there are military fighter jets or that there are naval combatants on the sea. It's a constant game of one-upsmanship or attempted one-upsmanship, and there are arms on the ocean, there are arms on the air, there are arms on the land, and there's just nothing special about space. There's no reason to think that space is going to be any more destabilizing. In general, we think navies stabilize for commerce. So, while it was nice to have had a period where there weren't weapons, I don't think that this is in any way catastrophic for the future of humanity.
You have to have the imperative for peace outweighing the incentive for war. And that means trade, interaction. Dr. Moser was talking about. If the Chinese were participating in the space station, think about it, during the entire Cold War, all the way through now, the one place where Russians and our allies have hung out in peace, taking care of each other, has been the space station. All right? And now and the other aspect of that is company-to-company trade. When you have enough trade going on in space, where it becomes disruptive for politicians to get into war mode, and of course down on the ground, democratic governments around the world, their extension into space is going to be much more peaceful than autocratic governments. So we need those different kind of sinews going on. But I think the space station and the way the Russians, the Americans work, we can bring the Chinese in on stuff like that. And it doesn't mean they're going to be turning into, I'm not being a Pollyanna, they're not going to turn into perfect actors at that point. But if you force somebody away, then they're going to go off and develop their own capabilities and their own technologies, and they're going to become the other, and you're going to become the other to them. Whereas if you're working together, you're going to have a peaceful future.
So unfortunately, we're out of time for the space and the MP panel, so can we give them a quick round of applause? And then just give us 1 short minute while we rearrange the stage, and then we're going to do the economics panel.
You can ask questions about anything in the economy or anything like that. Let's begin. So first, I kind of want to ask a question to Nathaniel. So everybody cares about the market. How does LBW feel about the market, specifically kind of looking towards the home economy?
And I'm sorry to go rogue on you so quickly too, but before we do that too, we do just want to say thank you to Dr. Colucci and yourself, Jacob, and Nate and Nathan for bringing all these great speakers together. Hannah as well for taking questions. Believe it or not, this is not the first time that a finance or wealth management professional has taken the stage and most of the room has exited. So we thank those who are here very much for sticking around and hearing us talk about doing our best effort in filling some big shoes, bringing a conversation out of space, outer space, into something so intimate as a home. So thank you very much for sticking around.
And Nathaniel, I'm going to pass that one to you.
Thank you, Tim. So, to be honest, we don't particularly care what happens in the markets day to day. Now, when you hear a wealth advisor like us say that, you think, well, how the hell can they do their job? Well, the reason why I say that is because we believe that, as I think that it's a similar theme throughout the speakers today, is that you need to pay attention to the micro, not the macro. You need to build a solid foundation and then build from there. I think that has been universal throughout what these speakers have been speaking about today. We feel the same when it is applied to investing in the markets. We believe that you should not buy the market, you should buy the company. You should buy companies that you understand. You should pay attention to your investment time frame, which we should believe should be for the long term, which is at least 10 plus years. You need to have an investment process, an investment framework, if you will. You need to have a process built around that framework. And you need to be consistent in the application thereof. And then on top of that, we believe when investing, you should have a high EQ, that is an emotional quotient. Most people think you need to have a high IQ. We disagree. You need to have a high EQ because we believe that, people are emotional, right? Everybody has emotions. And sometimes those emotions lead to irrationality. So when you put the fact that people make up markets, what do you get? You get irrational markets. So when you put all that together, the short-term noise today, tomorrow, the next quarter has no applicability or very little applicability for the next 10 years. So that's how we view the markets on our end.
It sounds to me like what you just described was the advisability of an index fund over picking an individual stock over a 10-year period, especially if the index fund, say NASDAQ or S&P, has done better than your choices for individual stocks. Would you agree with that?
So your question is?
Well, would you agree with the advisability of an index fund if the index fund over, say, a 10-year period has done better than various experts' selection of individual stocks by virtue of the reduced risk factor? Would you agree with that?
I see. We do believe that aside from how we choose to invest, that is the active investment in individual companies, the next best thing is index funds. Yeah. We do believe that. If people come to us and they say that, you charge too high of fees, which in our opinion, we don't think we do.
Do you agree with the Graham and Dodd approach that you can diversify your own fund with as few as 10 to 12 stocks?
Well, to be frank, that's how we invest. 10 to 15 is our magic number because we believe that you can't possibly know every single company, publicly traded company within the markets today.
That's another argument for an index fund.
Exactly. But over the long run, or if you're doing your job, if you're sticking to those core characteristics that I just described, we believe that if done correctly, that you can beat the indices over the long run. And yes, we do adhere to some of the fundamentals of the Graham-Dodd theory.
I've seen some recent research on exactly that point, that's contrary to your conclusion.
That the index beats the active? Okay.
Yeah.
Over what time frame?
Particularly the market of the last few years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at the time frame, that's very applicable, right? So a lot of people in here, if you're looking from an academic standpoint, if we're taking a sample size over the last 10 years, how representative over the last 100 years? Yeah. So in the last 10 years, what's happening inside the markets hasn't never happened before, right? The Great Recession was the Great Recession for a reason. And of course, if all, as tides go out,
what was the reason for it?
Lifts all tides up, correct? Right?
What was the reason for the Great Recession?
What was the reason for the Great Recession? There was a vast amount. And I'm not an economist personally, so I can't tell you exactly what happened, but obviously the banking system, the credit facilities, things in that eroded. There was a lot of securities, there was a lot of things inside of that pretty much blew up. And it created job loss, it created a lot of different things.
Most
that
people believe
didn't
the
allow it.
Great Recession in 2008 was caused by the overvaluation of the real estate market and the subprime mortgages, which were sold mostly to foreign buyers, that had a ripple effect here in this country. Do you agree with that?
I don't necessarily agree with the sold to foreign buyers piece. I think that
Iceland.
that was one piece of the puzzle, yes, but it wasn't just sold to foreign buyers. It was sold to all investors in the subprime mortgage market. There was other factors at play. There was the fact that the stock market had risen by an incredible amount during that period prior. One could argue that the subprime mortgage bubble popping was acted as a catalyst. That is also true. But what really happened was it was just a combination of so many different factors all combining at once in that time period.
So kind of transitioning into more household finances, where do you feel that most households should be paying more attention to in their finances? Dan?
I'm pretty much going to set Tim up for this one in a second. Usually there's some typical questions that we'll see come through the door, right? One of which is, where should I be at this stage of life? That's a relative question, and we're more concerned about the absolute. It's not very productive for us to answer in relativity if everybody else is doing a terrible job. So a similar natured question would be, what do I need to retire? That's the wrong question as well. The reason for that is the right question would be, what do you want retirement to look like? So we have a situation where we're a wealth management company with an asset management piece built inside of us. What most people tend to focus on when they first come to see us is asset management, right? The managing of funds, which, don't get us wrong, is very important. But what we've also found is that what gets missed is the financial planning piece. So the financial planning piece provides the purpose so that those assets can be managed in a way that should be applicable to that specific person. So I'll let Tim answer that, being that he has a CFP and is also, I think, only one of 6 independent advisors that also happens to have a CPWA.
Yeah, and Dan brings a good point. One of the hype words within our industry is financial planning, and I question everybody here, what is financial planning, right? What does that really mean, and how does that become applicable within the household? The reason why it's so difficult to define is because financial planning is life, right? And life is mixed with decision-making since you're a child all the way into your adulthood. And what happens with us as people is that we evolve. So we're talking about space, we're talking about political regimes, political changes, and that changes then the essence of the household. So our job is to navigate an agile and essentially always changing life. You can have an experience of death, you could have an experience where you get married, you can have an experience of hardship, and that changes your perception on the world, and what it changes is your perception on goals. And that's the difficult part to really truly define what financial planning is, because the essence of it is its life. And so when we're looking at it from the standpoint of what do we think people should focus on, really what is the biggest miss that we see a lot, typically with people that don't have an abundance of wealth, like the person who sold books online, is an emergency fund, the basics of an emergency fund. And people always argue with us, well, I want to make more money. Well, the hard part with financial planning is, Nathan and I go back and forth quite a bit, is I have to look at the quantitative but also the qualitative. And sometimes having cash on hand doesn't mean you have to make a return. Because what it is it allows you to become the bank, right? So, if you really break it down to basic accounting level, it's credits and debits. And if you don't have enough credits anymore, where do you have to go? Well, if you can't have, Tim Bickmore as the bank, I'm gonna have to go to the actual bank, and I'm gonna have to pay him interest, because nothing's free here. There's no such thing as a free lunch, is what I learned day one in my economics classes. So that's a huge miss that people just sometimes have a difficulty of just putting it together, or they don't have the discipline. Dan mentioned that a lot at the beginning. We invest in the long term, but when people are looking at the financial planning perspective as well, you have to think long term. But the problem is you don't know what long term is, so you have to plan for the short term and anticipate the long term, which will allow you to set yourself up for opportunities. So when people the other difficult part with financial planning, and I joke about this a lot, is, it's keeping up with the Joneses. I call it keeping up with the Kardashians. Is everyone's looking at everybody else now and saying, hey, I want that, I want that. And what we have in our job, and which is we're grateful for, is I get to see behind the iceberg, right? I don't just get to see the tip. I get to see everything. And I get to see how people built it, why they built it, and what nature they built it, and people don't get to see that. You don't get to see how your neighbor had that nice house. It could be loaded with debt. It could have been an inheritance. It could have been fortune from something that they didn't even know. So trying to compare yourself to others is another huge detriment within financial planning, because you may want things different than someone else. Everyone is different. If you're going to break it down from an economic standpoint, everybody has a utility curve. There's a reason why you study it, right? It's because I value the dollar differently than you, and differently than Dan, and differently than everybody else in this room. So for me to become exponential or optimized, I have to understand what I want, right? And how I'm going to go forward with it. So those are some of the threats and some of the difficulties. They're very qualitative. It's not necessarily quantitative. And I think the other piece too is in society, right? Use a teacher for example. They may go into a profession that just doesn't make money. Like, it's just difficult and it's hard. So do you have a side gig? Do you not? And then how do you know? But our job is to educate that and let them know, here's your scenario. And if they say, you know what, this is what I want to do, great, because you're making a trade-off. It's an opportunity cost. And if you're willing to accept it and you're willing to understand it, then it wasn't a wrong decision. So that's kind of like our focus and kind of how we work on it. And those are really some of the areas that we see just are big threats within a household.
Awesome. So I guess another question I have is, what do you see as that kind of makes up most of Americans' assets? What are some of the challenges that incorporate with that as well?
Yeah, kind of going off of the threats, now it's more of the opportunities. I think real estate, right? So a big piece of individuals' net worth is typically tied into their primary home. And then you can read studies and different things, but one of the greatest assets that I think people maybe misunderstand or misrepresent is their income from whatever job they're doing, right? So if you're making $100,000 or $500,000, if you think about it from the capacity of somebody maybe who's making, let's say, $500,000 a year, tell me how many small businesses are making $500,000 a year, right? You're running a small corporation within your own household. You have an income stream that can be consistent for 30 years. So if you're disciplined enough and you understand it and you can break it down, you can be very prosperous, right? But that means that you have to recognize that, yeah, you know what, that Tesla that I want to, liquidate my fund to buy, you can't do it.
For your daughter.
For my daughter, right? You can't do it, right? It's a trade-off. So what are you really getting out of it? And I think real estate, the hard part with primary residence is, how do you liquidate it? You go out to get another mortgage, you have to sell it, you have to downsize. How easy is that really to do? And so the one big issue is people may want to pay off their mortgage really quickly or have this real estate, but at the end of the day, we're nomads. We always have to have a primary residence. And so if we're going to sell it to actually gain access to that capital, what are you going to do next? So you're just going to live on the street? Like, it's an illiquid asset. So it's an opportunity and a threat there. And I think that, if you look at research and read papers, 401ks, the demise of pension plans, things in that capacity have been a big change. I think it's a cultural change. And it's interesting from the standpoint that a lot of people, I think like someone at the average American has $100,000 in their 401k. That's not good. You can't sustain that. And there's been research, economists, look at Richard Thaler, they're promoting throughout states to have increasing contributions within a 401k. But essentially what we did is corporate America said, you know what, we don't want to take this risk anymore, but we're going to shift it over to the individual. But then the also problem is, like, I'll pass this to Dan, but the education level for just personal finances in the United States is very poor. So it's a difficult dichotomy, it's a difficult issue, and we would hope that could be a more prosperous thing in the future.
Yeah, as far as education is concerned, we've heard some tidbits on it too. You're kind of leading into some opportunities there, but they start with some threats. So what we have in front of us is a gigantic bag of flaming threats, right? And of which education is one of those. Some of which we've talked about is the educational system, which we do think that there are some changes that can be made there, but I really want to focus on a different piece of that. So I studied finance at UW-Whitewater, and Whitewater was a great place. I very much enjoyed being there. I pretty much today reject or don't use everything I learned at Whitewater. So the reality there is, I wish I would have spent a little less time talking about yield curves and how to calculate different calculations, and spent more time actually being taught how to think long term and how to use critical thought. And that's really what comes into play when we're trying to figure out how to solve situations that are very specific to people.
Yeah, so I know that you guys have clients all across the United States in many different economic locations. So what are kind of some of the big challenges that come with the economic factors of living in different regions of the same country of the United States?
Yeah, so one of our largest states outside of the state of Wisconsin is California, and what's fascinating about California is real estate. So we have a lot of our clients that are looking to potentially purchase their first home or a second home or get into another residence. And if you compare that to if you're looking at Ripon or even Madison, Wisconsin, the price there for, let's say it's a 2,000 square foot home, you're looking at $1.2 to $1.5 million, right? And yes, people do probably make a little bit more income just due to inflation and things in that nature, but it's a very different approach, and it's a very different thing. And what we find is more fascinating than just that is that all their friends are doing it, so then I should be doing it. And why am I not in a house? Is why shouldn't I rent? And what does that really look like? And it's more of a battle, I think, on the psychological standpoint, than necessarily the number standpoint, because it's hard for people. Society's very good at pushing us towards a certain thing that everybody else is doing, and so we battle that a lot and say, hey, what's good for you, not what's good for everybody else, because that can be very different. And then income, I think income would be another one that's a very big difference, and that's just obviously due to just cost of living within that area. And we happen to work with a few tech firms, people who work there, and obviously, everyone wants tech firms to come in because it's high-paying jobs, so we can then replace and recycle the dollar and all that fun stuff. So there's some definitely different wealth perspectives from Madison to definitely Los Angeles and San Francisco.
And most days we actually feel like therapists. So I'll go a little bit more specific into an example that Tim's talking about, because that's what I would have said too, is for just a clear example is when we deal with a real estate situation, say here in Wisconsin compared to Los Angeles. And he also brings up another threat that's a major threat that we see, which is known as FOMO, the fear of missing out, which leads people to make decisions that perhaps they should have never gotten to. But to kind of give you an idea as to some of those specific differences that we'll see. If we're looking at a $1.5 million place in LA compared to what would be maybe equivalent here to $200,000 or $300,000 house, the loan process is very different. So when we're talking to a client in Los Angeles where the income is there to support a $300,000 down payment so that we can get in the 20% range, the problem there is that the down payment isn't the biggest issue. It's the $7,000 mortgage payment a month that comes with it. So whereas here we would feel maybe in some situations more apt to say, maybe you don't need to put that 20% down here, where we feel those values might be more stable for one. But two, in a case like this, where if we're giving advice here, money is cheap at the bank right now. So it may not make sense to let that banker off the hook by putting a whole bunch of that money down. But in LA, it's a different story because we got to worry about the cash flow issue. Los Angeles County is interesting too, because this is a widespread issue. So in LA, taxes are frozen at 1.25%. Well, they're frozen that way because if you end up selling the house, the problem is that you can't afford the tax situation. So it gets frozen until the transaction happens. You have a lot of people in Los Angeles that won't sell their home because even though they're going to get a lot of equity, it's going to cost of equity to go back in, they can't afford the tax bill to move.
So dealing with all these different clients, with a whole bunch of different economic situations in different economic regions of the United States, how much of your service is a hard science on figuring out what to do, and how much is it an art in trying to figure out what's best for each individual person?
I get, it's a good question, and I think that I would say this is way more of an art than a science. The science piece is actually the easy piece, crunching the numbers, understanding the numbers, going through the analytics. I mean, you can teach that, that's easy. What's really difficult is the art, and the art in which is really comes down to behavioral finance, right? It's behavioral psychology.
I really have to interrupt. I couldn't disagree more.
Yeah.
My experience with, not just singling out anyone here, but my experience is that there really is a lack of information on the number crunching, and if you ask the average financial advisor what his degree is in, it could be anything from finance to art appreciation. And if you ask them what book they read, and you ask them about Graham and Dodd, usually they don't know what you're talking about.
You happen not to be those people.
So the idea that somehow this is an art is, I think, something you're going to have to be persuasive on.
Yeah.
The idea that this is an art.
Yeah.
You're
So
going to advise somebody on their financial.
Yeah.
And it's an art.
So yeah, you didn't quite let me finish, but in the sense that yes, you're right. So let me give you an example of the hard part from the analytical standpoint. How many people in here say, hey, should I pay my mortgage down or not? How easy that is a question, right? It's very difficult actually, but a lot of advisors will give you this answer. Well, if your mortgage is at 3% and you can make 6% in the market, why are you paying down your mortgage, right? It can make the difference. But is that really true? Because what about cash flow? What about when you're actually in retirement, right? That's a multifaceted question. And so yes, we do take the details and we get into it because number one, we like it, we enjoy it. And when I say that it's easy, I don't mean that it's actually easy because it is a difficult question to answer, but numbers are numbers, right? They're going to tell you an answer. But what's not going to tell you an answer is people. So people walk into our office and I have to ask them and I have to get to the point of, should you pay down that mortgage? But they don't even know what they want, right? And so I have to ask those open-ended questions. We have to really take them apart. And that's really the art of it, right? Because people will always ask us, hey, what should I do? But sometimes we're trying to optimize, and optimizing there's not a right or a wrong answer. It's what do you want? So when people sit down in our office, I have to make sure that they understand what they want, and our job is to educate and give information for each opportunity or each decision that they potentially can make. So I think that's the art piece, is trying to understand people and trying to understand that not everybody's the same, and that yes, situations will rhyme, but they won't repeat. I mean, and we could give a litany of explanations. I mean, for one, right? Here's a good example. Set up a plan for an individual. It was great. Said, hey, you know what? This is what we can do. I think we can make it done. Get this done. She walks into my office the next time, and she says, hey, I bought a piano. A piano.
Grand.
Yep. And so that means, so what did that piano decision do? So she bought it for her son. Her son wants to go to medical school. Son's not quite in college. That means she has to hold a piano for the next probably 12 years. And so that means she can't move because she wanted to move to Belize. She wanted to move out of the state. So she's like, I can't do that anymore. It completely blew up her plan. One purchase completely ruined it. And so what we have to do is then look at it and say, okay, let's make, we have to be agile, we have to change, we have to do that. And it's more of those questions of, are you sure, do you understand what you want? And the problem is understanding what you want today doesn't mean you know what you want tomorrow, or the next day, or the next, and the next. And it's kind of those battles that we go through.
With the idea that you need to know what your client wants to do. You need to know what your client wants to be able to plan. And you need to know what your client's financial future and obligations are in order to do what you're supposed to do. I don't disagree with that. But the idea that somehow it's an art.
Why would it not be an art then?
Because it's not.
Why? You asked me the question, so I'm asking back, why is it not an art? You haven't given me an answer.
It's not an art because when you know the answers to those questions I just asked you, it's pretty easy to figure out what a particular person should be doing with their money.
Have you ever tried to figure out what somebody wants?
Now, if they choose to be deceptive about what they want, or they're hard, or they're not honest with you, then that's a different set of equations. But if you are able to figure out what they want to accomplish, the solution to that is reasonably straightforward.
Is it?
It's not an art.
That's assuming that they're being dishonest or they simply just don't.
I'm sorry.
That's assuming that they're being dishonest or you haven't discovered it. But the fact of the matter is it changes.
If your client is not honest, I can't help it.
But sir,
if your client is not honest with you, how in the world can you do anything?
Sir, has your life changed over the years? Have you, when you started when you were 20 until today, how many differences have you gone through? Like that's the point we're trying to make, is that what people remove or discredit from what we do is it's not consistent, because life's not consistent. We're talking about space, right? We're talking about the new frontier. We're talking about things that can change.
The element of change in somebody's life, which should be factored into their financial plan. What we're talking about, what you raised, is a person who's not willing to describe to you accurately their current situation, their future situation, or what they want to become. I think I see a difference here. Sure, you can help somebody plan for contingencies, and that's part of a good financial plan. But if the person is not honest with you, won't tell you what they have, want, or intend to do, for example, how can you apply any kind of critical thinking to what they should be doing in their life?
That's very difficult.
Now I'd like to open it up to the audience to ask some questions.
Anybody else got questions?
So anybody else, we don't need a microphone. Just raise your hand. We can pick people and they can ask their question. So does anybody have any questions? Yes, right over there.
Do you use any overriding principles? I mean, there has to be, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for instance, hey, it's probably the first thing anybody, if they come to you and say, you got to live within your means.
Yeah.
Because if you invariably, if you make more than you spend, you will become wealthy.
Yep.
And there's, you can't, and you talk about the piano, and see that there, it's like, hey, can you afford that piano?
Yeah.
And that probably, the art is trying to communicate to that somebody that thinks they want that piano, and trying to convince them that, no, you really don't want that piano because you're taking a long view.
Yeah. So in case anybody can't hear, the question was on if they use any overriding principles and kind of making their decisions and helping their clients. So.
So from a financial planning perspective, I know we do have some really good overriding principles when it comes to our investment framework, which I know Nathaniel would probably be very happy to explain. From a financial planning perspective, there is the rules of thumb, right? So, the CFP course, all that fun stuff. But what really it boils down to is you're 100% right? The financial planning in a very basic level is what is your income, what are your expenses, and do you have anything left over? Right? So if your E is higher than your I, that means you're negative, and that means you're going into debt. If your I is higher than your E, that means you have some cash flow to play with, which then we can be, aggressive on achieving other goals. Obviously you can look at like banks, for example. You need to have a certain loan-to-value ratio. You need to have this, you need to have that. But typically the way that we approach it is we just go for more of a customized approach, because I think the most difficult thing that I've experienced over my course of my years is that it's very easy for me to sit there and say you're spending too much money, but then it's also very difficult to sit in front of a person who may be a single mother with children, and saying, hey, you don't have enough, right? And then they're like, well, how am I going to get around this? Like, so when it comes down to it's a difficult process when you're trying to recognize and sympathize with somebody who may be in a hard position, but also trying to also be the person that says, hey, this isn't working and this is how we can potentially make changes. But everybody is different. As you go up the wealth scale, it becomes a little bit easier. And the reason why it becomes easier is because money becomes less of an issue, and you can become more optimization and not survival mode. But you guys would be very surprised on how many people are actually in survival mode. It's quite amazing, and it can be somebody who's a doctor, right? One of the best things one of my mentors told me is that doctors are sometimes the hardest people to plan for, because what they don't recognize is that income stream gets turned on, and did they have enough to then continue their lifestyle? A lot of people are unwilling to reduce their lifestyle to be able to support themselves in retirement. So sometimes it's not even relative to wealth, it's just relative to what you really want to do.
It's also nice when that piano is coming down the pipeline. But in this case, we didn't know that piano. It's not because she was being dishonest. It was because she was being impulsive, right? Yeah. Which people are. So it's nice in those things, and I wish that was the case. We see it with real estate all the time. Where last week we got a call. hey, I bought a home, how do I handle this situation? Right? So it's common sense, but that's not what we're really working on.
For me to make it look good.
There's the art.
Yeah, over there in the back.
Yeah, without getting back into the arts versus science, what are your thoughts today on active trading versus the mutual fund index fund safety? Correct.
So you're referencing ETFs versus mutual funds when you say active trading, or you mean like algorithmic trading?
Active trading in general.
Okay.
Versus passive.
Versus passive.
Versus just passive index fund investing.
Well, we don't do day trading, I can tell you that much. And we don't do passive. And as I said previously, we think that passive is the next best thing after active management. Active management is different than day trading. Active management is what I previously described. Investing for the long term, understanding what you're investing in. Day trading, in my opinion.
My assumption of this question was, over the long term, you recommend individual stock purchases, or do you recommend index funds? Was that the
That would be a short.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's the essence of it.
Okay.
So long-term being, say, 30 years.
The next generation.
30 years.
Yeah. We recommend investing in individual companies that you understand, that you have a good idea of where you think it's going to be in the next 10, if not 15, 20, 30 years. You have a basic understanding of whether that company has a moat, if you will. What is their sustainable competitive advantage? How will that moat erode with time? How will it increase with time? Of course, you should understand management. How has management performed? Have they proven to be intelligent capital allocators? You can see examples of this throughout your research in the company, reading their transcripts, the quarterly call transcripts, conference transcripts, reading their annual letters, seeing what they said 5 years ago, and seeing if it happened as they said it would in the future, in the present. And then, most importantly, the price you pay. That's, I think, one of the most fundamental core concepts that most people, when they're investing in publicly traded companies or private companies or fixed income, don't appreciate, which is the price you pay versus what you think it's worth. And what we try to do is we try to make sure there's a significant buffer between the two. We try to buy something at a discount versus what we think it's ultimately worth. And we believe that over the long term, if you understand what you're investing in, you have very good odds at achieving a decent return over time. Did that answer your question, sir?
Sure.
And
I guess what I'm getting at, it seems like as index funding becomes more prevalent, you can argue whether that's the case or not, that there might be a threat to the industry that you're in by less people doing active trading and investing in individual stocks.
You're entirely correct, sir. I don't disagree with you in any way, shape, or form, which is why our business model has become what we started out originally to do, which is integrating financial planning, estate planning, holistic wealth planning into the picture for what we believe to be a very decent price, I would say.
And I think to add on to that as well, from like the active-passive argument, which is interesting, is as long as you believe in efficient market theory, then passive obviously could work. But at some point, let's say that the market gets up to the 80% level that, rest in peace, John Bogle mentioned. At what point does price discovery become irrelevant? And at that point, I would love to be on the 20% side of that coin as an active manager.
Again, I have to admit, if you're advising somebody to buy an individual stock and you're also advising them to do essentially a security analysis, which is what you described, and you're talking about the ordinary private investor, this is way beyond the competence of most private investors, and as well as the knowledge of how many of these individual stocks they need to own in order to equalize the risk between, my example, of a specialized index fund of some kind, and how many stocks they need to own and the depth of the security analysis they need to do and the skills they need to do that. I think you need to supplement what you said by advising the man how many individual stocks he would need to put himself in a position of advantage and over what period of time. And the key question is the amount of time and energy and skill required to do an individual security analysis on 1 to 10 or 20 stocks. Is that worth the difference in how that stock performs, even if it performs well, than the index fund that you're comparing it to? Isn't that really the issue?
Yes, and we do that. That is our aim. That is our goal. You're to your point about the amount of time and energy you have to put in that kind of security analysis. Yes, we completely agree, which is why we have discretion, because all of our clients will frankly tell us that they don't want to have to apply the time and energy to do that sort of security analysis, which is why they come to us in the first place. And those who may choose not to come to us, as we said, we would tell them to go and invest in a common index, such as the S&P 500 or the Vanguard Total Institutional Market, or Vanguard International Market, if they want to get some of that diversification. We completely agree with that sentiment. So it's all a matter of what the client or the prospect, the person feels. That's in fact how I would argue the art versus the science comes into play, is that it's the qualitative piece, not only with regards to financial planning, estate planning, but also investment management, having an understanding of not only the quantitative when looking at an investment, but looking at the qualitative, looking at that management piece. That's qualitative. Listening to management as they say what they said in the past and what they're actually doing today. That is the art and what I particularly do.
The problem with getting to that conversation of engagement to begin with, which has to happen for that to be understood, is that you have to also understand that maybe it makes sense to see where we're coming from first before I make this next statement. So the three of us and others within our company, we do this because we love finance. And we love the impact that finance can make on a person or a family's household. We hate our industry. And the reason why we don't like our industry is because our industry is a commodity. It is, as you mentioned, filled with individuals that are simply filling a sales role. Now, nothing wrong with sales. However, people are counting on experts. It's not what they find. So when we set out to form such an entity, we did so by wanting to change the perception utilization of wealth management by creating this to be an actual profession that we don't feel it really is today. So if that can be created, if that idea can be created, and the level of engagement that you talk about, we actually, I think, agree a lot on the security analysis part, because what we're talking about is a lot of what you find within Benjamin Graham's teachings and so on, right? Such as circle of competence, to put in a process so that we understand the investment management piece, not just the financial planning piece, right? To put those filters in play. We don't deviate from those filters, because if we do, now we're getting into territory where we create harm to our clientele. If we don't understand it, we don't buy it. It's that simple. My mother taught school for 41 years in the public sector, mathematics. That makes her a saint. But in doing so, I remember going to school. I'd finish school. I'd go to Hebrew school. I finished Hebrew school. I'd go home, and I got more math. And as a kid, I hated that. It was awful, right? And I know the answer still. So I do the problem to get the problem right. I'd still get half credit. Why? Because I didn't show my work. I hate it as a kid. As an adult, I highly appreciate it. The process is just as important as the solution, so that we can duplicate it. But the reality is that's not commonly found when it comes to the interface between client and professional in our industry. Should be.
Well, unfortunately, we are running low on time, so I'd like to give a warm thank you to our wonderful panel here.
And this is coming to the end of our program for today. I know it's been a long day, so I'll try to keep this part short so we can all get out of here as soon as possible. But I do have some people that I need to thank first. And first of all, I would like to thank our amazing speakers that took time out of their busy schedule to come here and share with us their knowledge and really open our eyes to a lot of different issues from around the world that are going on. I mean, it's truly been a wonderful day, and I know I've learned a lot. I hope you all have learned a lot. And next, I would like to really thank all of our volunteers from both Sigma Chi and International Relations Club, along with the marketing department. Without their work, we really couldn't have pulled this off today. And I'm really thankful to all the volunteers that decided to help us out today. So thank you guys so much. Next, I need to thank two very special individuals who have been helping me from the start plan this entire event. There's absolutely no way that this event would have been possible without their hard work, helping me plan this event over the past year. And that would be Nathan Young and Nathaniel Young and Nathan Fawcett. Yeah, please give them a round of applause. And now the main reason why this whole event actually happened. I would like to give a very special thank you to Dr. Colucci. Without his tireless work and wealth of knowledge and connections, this would have never happened. Throughout this year and a half of planning, thousands of text messages, phone calls, emails, hours spent in his office, going over every little detail. We truly could not have made this without you. And I just want to say thank you so much for giving me and the two Nates the opportunity to be a part of this project with you. We've truly learned a lot, and I think this is a really amazing part of being at Ripon College, is being able to do something like this event. So again, thank you. And I hope you all have enjoyed today's conference. I hope you all are leaving here learning something new, with a new perspective on different things, whether that be space or NATO or national security or the economy. That's really what today was about, is trying to educate and show different perspectives from all walks of life. So thank you. I hope you all have a safe trip home, and stay warm as this Wisconsin spring continually looks like winter. So thank you. Have a good night.